The old cowboy had lived most of his life under the wide, open skies. He had grown up in a small town, surrounded by rolling fields, dusty trails, and ranches that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. From the moment he could walk, he had learned the ways of the land. He knew the smell of the earth after rain, the sound of cattle moving in the dark, and the rhythm of a day on the ranch before anyone else could even open their eyes. His hands were calloused, not from laziness, but from years of honest work mending fences, saddling horses, and guiding herds across uneven ground. His back was strong, but it carried the stories of every sunrise he had greeted with a shovel, a rope, or a heavy bucket. Life had taught him that strength was not only measured in muscles but in patience, endurance, and the quiet wisdom earned through experience. That afternoon had started like any other. The sun was bright but not hot, casting long shadows across the fields. The old cowboy was checking the fences along the property line, making sure everything was secure before nightfall. He moved slowly, not because he was weak, but because he had learned the value of careful steps. One loose wire could mean trouble for the cattle, and one wrong move could make an accident that nobody wanted. He hummed softly to himself as he worked, his thoughts wandering to memories of past days, some filled with laughter, others with hard lessons. He remembered the first time he rode a horse alone, the first cow he had herded without anyone's help, and the nights he had spent in the barn, repairing broken gates while the wind howled outside. Each memory reminded him of who he was and how far he had come. Nearby, younger workers were busy with their tasks. They moved quickly, full of energy, often racing each other to complete chores before the sun began to set. They were skilled in their own way, but they lacked the patience and calm understanding that only time could bring. Among them was a woman who had recently joined the team. She was confident, strong, and unafraid to voice her opinions. She moved through the field with purpose, her hands efficient and quick. But that day, she noticed the old cowboy struggling slightly with a heavy gate hinge. She laughed lightly, thinking she was teasing him in good humor. Then, with a little more force than intended, she said, "You're too old for this." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. For a moment, there was silence. The young workers looked at him, some unsure whether to laugh along, some embarrassed by her bluntness. The old cowboy paused, the tool in his hands momentarily still. He looked at her without anger, without resentment, but with eyes that carried a deep understanding. He had heard words like these before, more times than he could count. People often judged him by his age, assuming that he could no longer handle the work he had done all his life. They did not see the years of experience behind his calm movements, the countless mornings he had risen before the sun, or the nights he had spent learning the land's lessons the hard way. He remembered a time when he was just a young man, not much older than the workers around him now. He had been full of energy, eager to prove himself, and ready to take on any challenge. Back then, older men would sometimes doubt him, and he had felt the sting of their skepticism, but he had worked through it, day by day, showing that skill and determination were more important than age or size. Now, years later, he understood that strength was not just about being fast or strong, but about knowing how to act, how to endure, and how to stay steady when others wavered. The woman's words were meant to mock, but they also reminded him of the value of all the lessons he had learned over a lifetime. He set the hinge down carefully and straightened his back, letting out a slow breath. His hands were steady, even though his body felt the pull of years of work. He could have answered her with a sharp word, a clever retort, or a boast about what he had done in his youth. But he didn't. The old cowboy had learned that anger rarely solved anything, and that pride was best shown through actions rather than words. Instead, he smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and continued with his work. His movements were deliberate, precise, and efficient. Every swing of the hammer, every adjustment of the hinge, carried the weight of decades of practice. The young woman watched him, perhaps expecting weakness or hesitation, but all she saw was competence and calm confidence. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Shadows stretched across the fields, and the air grew cooler. The old cowboy continued his work, checking each fence post and reinforcing weak points. Every now and then, he would glance at the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. The land was quiet, except for the occasional sound of a bird settling in for the night or the rustle of the wind through the grass. In those moments, he felt a deep connection to everything around him. The earth beneath his boots, the cattle grazing nearby, and the history of those who had walked the same paths before him. He understood that age brought limitations, yes, but it also brought insight, foresight, and a sense of calm that youth often lacked. The young workers noticed something changing as they continued their tasks. The old cowboy's pace was slower than theirs, but his work was flawless. He avoided mistakes, anticipated problems before they arose, and moved in a rhythm that kept him from exhaustion. The woman who had mocked him earlier tried to focus on her own work, but she could not help noticing how naturally he handled everything. There was no rush, no unnecessary effort, just steady, confident action. It became clear that there was a difference between energy and effectiveness, between speed and mastery. The old cowboy had lived long enough to understand that life rewarded those who learned patience and precision. Around mid-afternoon, a small incident occurred that further demonstrated his skills. A young calf had wandered close to the broken part of a fence, teetering dangerously near the edge of the property. Panic rose among the younger workers, who were unsure how to handle the situation without causing harm to the animal. The old cowboy noticed immediately. Without hesitation, he approached the calf slowly, speaking in soft, low tones that seemed to calm the animal. He guided it back to safety, using gentle but firm movements, all while explaining his actions to those watching. The young workers could not help but be impressed. It was not brute strength that saved the calf, but a combination of experience, timing, and an understanding of behavior, a skill that could only come with years of observation and practice. By the time the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the old cowboy had finished his tasks for the day. His body ached, as it always did after a long day. But there was satisfaction in every ache. The land was secure, the cattle safe, and the work completed. The younger workers looked at him with newfound respect, some silently acknowledging that age had not diminished his abilities. The woman who had mocked him earlier remained quiet, a little embarrassed by her earlier words. She had expected weakness and fatigue. But what she had witnessed was mastery, calm, and resilience. As twilight turned into night, the old cowboy packed his tools, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He glanced one last time over the land he had cared for so long. There was a deep sense of pride in his heart, not the pride of boasting or seeking approval, but the quiet pride of knowing he had done what needed to be done. He understood that life often judged too quickly, measuring people by appearance rather than ability, by age rather than wisdom. Yet he also knew that every challenge was an opportunity to prove, not in words but in action, that true strength was enduring, patient, and steady. That night, as he walked toward the barn, he reflected on the woman's words. "You're too old for this." They had stung, yes, but they had also awakened something familiar, a quiet determination, a reminder of every time he had been underestimated and yet had succeeded. He knew that night would bring more work, more challenges, and perhaps more doubts from others. But he was ready. His life had been a collection of days like this, each one shaping him, teaching him that age was not weakness, but a layer of experience, wisdom, and quiet power. And when the darkness fell, as it always did, he would continue, steady and strong, guided not by pride alone, but by the knowledge that he had earned the right to stand firm. No matter what anyone said, as night began to fall, the land transformed into a world of shadows and muted colors. The sky turned a deep blue, and the first stars appeared, faint and twinkling, like tiny candles in the distance. The air grew cooler, and the quiet of the evening wrapped itself around the ranch. For many, the fading light made the world seem uncertain and intimidating. The younger workers hesitated, unsure of the next steps, while the old cowboy felt a familiar steadiness settle over him. He had spent decades moving through nights like this, guiding cattle, repairing fences, and navigating challenges when the land seemed most difficult to manage. Darkness, to him, was not a reason to slow down, but a time to rely on experience and calm judgment. Earlier in the day, a problem had been noticed, one that could not wait until morning. A section of the fence along the northern edge of the property had been weakened by recent storms. Rain had loosened the posts, and strong wind had twisted wires into dangerous angles. If left unattended, the cattle could wander off, or worse, get stuck in the fence and injure themselves. The younger workers, though capable and energetic, were unsure how to tackle it at night. They had tools but not the confidence that only years of practice could provide. Their movements were hesitant, and their attempts to work quickly only made the wires more tangled. Anxiety began to grow. The old cowboy approached the area calmly, his eyes scanning the fence under the dim light of the setting sun. He took in every detail: the leaning posts, the tension in the wires, and the uneven ground beneath his boots. Unlike the younger workers, he did not rush. Every step he took was deliberate, measured. He assessed the situation in silence, knowing that rushing could make the problem worse or even cause an accident. Nightfall brought uncertainty, yes, but it also brought an opportunity to show that careful planning and experience often outweighed raw energy. The young workers watched him closely. Some whispered among themselves, questioning whether he could manage in the dark. The woman who had mocked him earlier lingered nearby, her expression a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. She had not expected him to act so quickly or so confidently, yet she could see that he moved with purpose, and there was no hint of hesitation in his actions. He reached into his bag of tools and selected the equipment he would need: sturdy wire cutters, hammer, nails, and a rope to secure posts that were still loose. Every movement seemed practiced, almost instinctive. He had done this countless times before, and it showed. The old cowboy began by stabilizing the posts, one at a time. He worked slowly, checking the ground around each post to ensure it was firm, and driving the stakes deeper to prevent them from shifting. The younger workers tried to help, but the cowboy gently guided them, showing them where to place nails, how to secure the wires, and how to keep the tension even. He explained everything as he worked, not in a bossy tone, but with patience. If the wire is too tight, it could snap. If it's too loose, the cattle will get through. Balance is everything, he said softly. His voice carried authority, not because of age, but because it was grounded in knowledge and years of practice. As the night deepened, the challenges grew more complicated. One post, in particular, had been badly damaged and required careful handling. It leaned dangerously, almost falling with the slightest touch. The younger workers hesitated, unsure of how to move it without injury. The old cowboy, however, approached it with calm determination. He examined the post, tested its stability, and devised a plan. Slowly and methodically, he began to lift it while the others supported it under his guidance. With patience and steady hands, the post was returned to its proper position, secured with nails and rope. The air was filled with a quiet awe. Even the woman who had doubted him earlier could not hide her admiration. While repairing the fence, the old cowboy's mind was always alert. He anticipated problems before they happened. A loose wire could catch on clothing or skin, a sharp edge could cut someone, and the uneven ground could trip even a careful step. He moved with awareness, checking everything twice. Every action was precise, each movement deliberate. The younger workers were learning without realizing it. They were seeing firsthand that experience was not just about doing a job, it was about understanding every detail, foreseeing difficulties, and acting before mistakes could occur. At one point, a sudden noise startled everyone. A small group of cattle had wandered closer to the fence, drawn by the smell of fresh grass beyond the boundary. Panic surged among the younger workers. They were unsure how to keep the animals safe while finishing the repairs. The old cowboy reacted instinctively. He approached the cattle slowly, keeping his voice low and calm. He guided them back with gentle movements, using a combination of experience and understanding of animal behavior. The herd followed him without panic, and the danger was averted. The younger workers were amazed. It was not force or strength that had saved the situation, but wisdom, patience, and careful planning. As the hours passed, the work continued under the faint glow of the moon. Stars shone brighter now, illuminating the fields with a soft silver light. The old cowboy never hurried, but he never slowed unnecessarily. Each task was completed methodically, step by step. The younger workers began to mimic his actions, following his instructions carefully. They realized that rushing only caused mistakes, while steady, precise work ensured that everything held together. The woman who had mocked him at the beginning of the day had grown quiet. She watched, learning in silence, slowly beginning to understand that age had not weakened him. It had given him insight and patience that were impossible to rush. During the night, fatigue began to creep in for everyone. The cold air, the long hours, and the mental focus required to work in darkness weighed heavily. Some younger workers struggled to keep their energy and attention. But the old cowboy seemed tireless, not because his body was stronger, but because he had learned how to conserve energy, how to pace himself, and how to avoid mistakes that would cost even more effort later. He reminded them gently, "Take your time. It's not a race. Every post you fix properly now saves hours of trouble tomorrow." His calm, steady presence kept the team focused and motivated, even as exhaustion set in. By the middle of the night, the majority of the fence had been repaired, and the cattle were safe. The young workers, who had begun the evening with doubt and skepticism, were now filled with respect. They had witnessed a skill that could not be taught quickly, a combination of knowledge, patience, foresight, and calmness under pressure. The old cowboy had led them through a difficult situation not with force or loud commands, but with quiet authority and careful action. The woman who had mocked him initially approached him cautiously. She did not speak immediately, unsure of what to say. Finally, she nodded her head, a gesture of recognition and respect. "I didn't realize," she admitted softly, "how much you know, how capable you are." The old cowboy smiled faintly, not with pride, but with understanding. He did not need her approval. The work itself, completed safely and successfully, was its own reward. Yet, in that small acknowledgement, he saw that lessons were being learned not just about fences or cattle, but about respect, patience, and understanding the value of experience. As the first hints of dawn began to appear in the east, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, the night's work was finally complete. The fence stood strong and secure. The cattle were safe, and the young workers had grown in confidence and understanding. The old cowboy packed away his tools, his hands steady and sure, even after hours of hard work. He took a moment to survey the land, his eyes tracing the fence line and the fields beyond. There was a quiet pride in knowing that he had guided others, protected the animals, and completed a difficult task without incident. That night, the old cowboy reflected on what had transpired. He had faced doubt and skepticism from others, yet he had shown through action what words alone could never convey. Strength, he knew, was not about youth or speed, but about endurance, foresight, patience, and the calm ability to handle any situation. The younger workers had witnessed this firsthand. They had learned that true skill often comes not from rushing or showing off, but from steady, thoughtful action, guided by experience and knowledge. The night had proven more than just the stability of a fence. It had proven the value of a lifetime of learning, the quiet power of patience, and the respect that comes naturally when someone demonstrates competence through action. The old cowboy walked to the barn, his steps deliberate and unhurried, carrying with him not only the tools of the trade but also the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing he had done exactly what needed to be done. Darkness, he knew, was not an obstacle, it was simply another part of life. A part that he was ready to face, guided by wisdom earned over decades. And as he entered the barn, the sounds of the night quieted, leaving only the rustle of the wind and the soft breathing of the cattle. The old cowboy knew that challenges would continue, that night after night would bring new tasks and tests. But he also knew that experience, patience, and calm judgment would always be stronger than doubt, mockery, or the passing assumptions of others. That night had shown it clearly strength was not measured in years, but in how wisely and steadily one used them. The night was fully settled now, and a cool, quiet darkness enveloped the ranch. The stars shone brightly in the clear sky, reflecting off the calm surfaces of small ponds and casting soft shadows over the fields. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of earth and grass. To most, the night might have felt daunting or still, but to the old cowboy, it was a familiar companion. He had faced countless nights like this, when the work was hard, the tasks were uncertain, and the land demanded patience and care. He knew that real challenges often came when the world seemed quiet, and others believed it was time to rest. After the fence repair earlier, he had thought the worst was over. But as he walked along the trail back to the barn, he noticed movement near the eastern pasture. A small herd of cattle had begun to wander toward a low-lying area that was wet and uneven, where they could easily get stuck or hurt themselves. The younger workers had tried to keep them away earlier, but fatigue was setting in. Their steps were slower, their voices less confident, and the darkness made every small noise startling. Panic could have easily spread among them if the old cowboy hadn't been there. He approached calmly, his boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the packed dirt. He didn't rush, and he didn't shout. He had learned long ago that animals respond to calm and steady energy, not noise or fear. His eyes scanned the herd, noting which animals were most likely to wander further and which were following the group's rhythm. He moved slowly, speaking softly, and the herd began to respond. The cattle shifted direction under his guidance, moving away from danger, as if they understood his calm authority. The younger workers watched in silence, amazed at how effortless his control seemed. The woman who had mocked him at the start of the evening was nearby, struggling to hide her surprise. She had expected him to be slow, tired, or unable to handle the situation. Instead, she saw someone who moved with confidence, who seemed to anticipate every challenge before it occurred. The old cowboy didn't rush, didn't force, and didn't show any signs of strain. His movements were precise and deliberate, a combination of muscle memory and long experience. He reminded them that strength wasn't about being fast, it was about being correct in the moment, using knowledge, patience, and calm judgment to guide every step. Once the cattle were safely away from the danger, he turned back to the fence line. Noticing that one post, damaged earlier by the storm, was still weak. The younger workers were too tired to help, and the dark made it difficult to see the finer details. Yet the old cowboy moved with purpose. He examined the post carefully, tapping it with his hammer to assess its strength. He didn't panic when it leaned slightly under pressure. Instead, he adjusted the ropes, reinforced the base, and worked slowly, ensuring it was secure. Every motion was precise, avoiding unnecessary strain. Watching him, the young workers realized that experience allowed someone to work smarter, not just harder. A small gust of wind swept through the field, rustling the leaves and making the dark shadows dance. The young workers felt their hearts beat faster. It was a night that tested both courage and patience. The woman who had mocked him spoke softly to one of her colleagues, almost as if admitting defeat in her own mind. I didn't think he could do this," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the respect in it was clear. The old cowboy, overhearing her, simply smiled faintly and continued his work without pause. He didn't need approval. He knew that real proof came from action, from completing the task correctly, safely, and effectively. Hours passed, and the darkness grew deeper. The night seemed endless, but the old cowboy remained focused. He had developed a rhythm over years of experience, one that allowed him to pace himself, conserve energy, and anticipate challenges. The younger workers tried to follow, but their lack of experience made every movement more laborious, every decision harder. Yet, they learned by observing him. They saw how he adjusted the wires carefully, how he checked every post before moving on, and how he handled the unexpected with calm authority. It became clear that true strength was not about rushing or showing off. It was about consistency, awareness, and patience. Suddenly, a louder noise echoed from the barnyard. A young calf had slipped near the edge of the pen, its small legs struggling in the soft ground. Panic rose among the younger workers. They rushed toward it, but their movements were hurried and unsafe. The old cowboy stepped forward immediately, his calm voice cutting through the panic. "Slowly. Slowly now," he said, his tone steady and reassuring. He reached the calf, guiding it gently but firmly back to safety. His hands were steady, his movements practiced, and his patience unwavering. The calf, sensing his calm energy, stopped struggling and allowed itself to be moved to safety. The young workers watched in silent admiration. It was not physical strength alone that had saved the calf, it was wisdom, patience, and knowledge gained over a lifetime. After ensuring that all the animals were safe, the old cowboy returned to the fence line. A section of wire had loosened further due to the shifting ground, and he knew it would need careful attention. He worked systematically, securing each strand with precision, ensuring it was tight but not dangerous. The younger workers tried to help, but often in their hurry, they created more problems. He guided them patiently, showing them exactly how to place the wires and how to tie knots that would hold against wind and pressure. Every instruction was a lesson, every correction a demonstration of experience and careful attention to detail. Time seemed to stretch as the night deepened. The cold air made movements slower, and fatigue weighed heavily on the younger workers. But the old cowboy seemed unaffected, not because he was immune to tiredness, but because he had learned how to pace himself, to focus on the most important tasks, and to conserve energy for moments that truly mattered. He reminded the team gently, "Focus on one post at a time. Don't rush. Every careful step now saves hours of work later." His calmness had a contagious effect. Even the tired workers began to slow down, work carefully, and follow his example. The woman who had mocked him earlier observed silently. She had entered the evening with doubt, even a little mockery. But now she saw something she could not ignore. She had underestimated the power of experience and wisdom. She realized that age did not mean weakness, it meant knowledge, patience, and the ability to remain steady when others faltered. She began to assist without hesitation, following his instructions and learning quickly. Her earlier laughter had faded, replaced with respect and understanding. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, the tasks of the night were almost complete. The fence was secure, the cattle were safe, and the younger workers had learned a valuable lesson, not just about ranch work, but about life. They had seen that patience, careful observation, and calm action often outweighed raw energy or impatience. The old cowboy packed his tools slowly, deliberately, making sure nothing was left behind. Every motion was precise, every action considered. He had faced doubt, fatigue, and darkness, yet he had not wavered. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the young workers gathered around. Their eyes reflected admiration and respect. They had been witnesses to a demonstration of true strength. Not just physical strength, but strength of mind, spirit, and skill. The old cowboy stood quietly, letting them absorb the lesson without words. Actions had spoken louder than any speech ever could. The woman who had doubted him approached at last. Her voice was quiet, respectful, and filled with newfound understanding. I see now," she said softly. "I underestimated you. You really know what you're doing." The old cowboy nodded, a faint smile on his face. He didn't boast or dwell on her earlier words. He knew that the proof had always been in the work, not in the acknowledgement of others. Yet, he also knew that respect had been earned, and lessons had been passed down quietly, naturally, through action, rather than argument. That morning, the ranch was calm, peaceful, and safe. The night's challenges had been met, and overcome. The young workers had learned that real strength came from knowledge, patience, and careful action. They had learned to trust the guidance of someone who had lived a lifetime in the saddle, working the land, and facing challenges with steady determination. And the old cowboy? He felt the quiet satisfaction of a job done well, of challenges met and managed, and of lessons passed on without a word. He knew that life would continue to bring tests, some during the day, some under the cloak of night, but he also knew that true strength was enduring, steady, and wise. His hands were tired, his back ached, and his body felt the long hours of work, but his mind was clear, his heart satisfied. Experience, patience, and steady action had once again proved their worth. The younger workers would remember this night for the rest of their lives, carrying with them lessons about respect, endurance, and the quiet power of wisdom gained through experience. And as the sun rose higher, casting warm light over the ranch, the old cowboy walked toward the barn with steady steps. The night had been long, the challenges had been many, but in every task completed, in every calm action, he had proven something far more important than physical strength. He had proven that experience, patience, and quiet determination were the true measures of power. Morning had arrived, soft and golden, casting warm light over the wide fields of the ranch. The air smelled of fresh earth and dew, and the quiet calm of the early day was a contrast to the tense and demanding night that had just passed. The old cowboy stood quietly near the barn, observing the land he had cared for all his life. The fence was secure, the cattle were safe, and the work was complete. Yet, more than that, he reflected on what had truly happened during the night. It had not only been a test of strength, but a test of patience, endurance, and the respect that comes from quiet competence rather than loud words. The younger workers gathered nearby, their faces still marked by fatigue, but now with something deeper, respect and admiration. They had been witnesses to a demonstration of skill and wisdom that could not be learned from books or shortcuts. The woman who had mocked him earlier stood a little apart, her expression thoughtful. She had expected weakness, hesitation, and perhaps failure. What she had witnessed instead was steady determination, careful action, and a calm that had guided them all through a challenging night. The old cowboy began his morning tasks, moving deliberately, checking the repaired fence line one last time. Every post was secure, every wire tight but safe. He walked slowly, observing the cattle grazing calmly in the pastures and ensuring that no hidden danger remained. While doing so, he also taught silently. The younger workers followed his movements, watching not just the physical actions but the thought behind each one. They noticed how he adjusted the tension on the wires, how he reinforced the weakest posts first, and how he anticipated problems before they arose. Each detail was a lesson in patience, observation, and experience. The woman approached him at last, her voice quiet, tinged with humility. I didn't expect you to handle it all so calmly," she admitted. "I thought you would struggle, maybe even fail." The old cowboy looked at her, his eyes soft but steady, and shook his head slowly. "It's not about proving anything to anyone," he said gently. "It's about knowing your work, understanding the land, and handling things carefully. Age doesn't mean weakness. It can mean knowledge, patience, and experience." She nodded, finally understanding. She had learned something far more important than any skill with a hammer or wire. She had learned that respect is earned through action, not words, through calm, steady competence, not mockery or doubt. The younger workers around them had also taken in the lesson. They now understood that energy and speed alone could not replace awareness, careful thought, and a lifetime of experience. The old cowboy had demonstrated something few could truly grasp: that true strength comes in many forms, and that wisdom, patience, and steady determination often outweigh raw power. As the sun climbed higher, the old cowboy moved toward the barn to store his tools. The younger workers helped quietly, aware of the importance of the moment. Each of them had experienced a night they would never forget, a night that had shown them the value of careful planning, calm judgment, and true leadership. The woman who had mocked him at first now worked alongside them, attentive and respectful, asking questions, and learning from the way he approached even the smallest task. During the day, more challenges arose on the ranch, as they always did. A stubborn gate refused to close properly, a young calf wandered near a water trough, and uneven ground threatened to trip someone moving quickly. Yet, the old cowboy remained calm. He approached each situation with steady hands and careful thought, guiding the younger workers and solving problems without haste or panic. His experience allowed him to see what others often missed, and his patience ensured that every solution was long-lasting and effective. The young workers began to realize that leadership was not about commanding loudly, it was about guiding quietly and wisely. By midday, the work on the ranch was well underway. The young workers had grown more confident, following instructions, observing carefully, and even anticipating some of the old cowboy's advice. The woman, who had doubted him at first, now sought guidance, asking for tips on how to handle cattle, secure fences, and manage tools effectively. She was learning more in a few hours than she had in months elsewhere. The old cowboy did not mind. He had learned long ago that teaching through example was often more powerful than teaching through words. Each step, each action, each careful decision was a lesson. Later, as they took a short break under the shade of a large oak tree, the younger workers gathered around the old cowboy. They were tired, yes, but their eyes were bright with understanding and appreciation. One of them, a young man who had worked only a few months on the ranch, spoke first. "I didn't think anyone could handle the night like you did," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "We would have made mistakes, or worse. But you stayed calm, steady, and knew exactly what to do." The old cowboy smiled faintly. "Experience teaches you patience," he replied. "It teaches you to anticipate problems, to act carefully, and to understand that rushing often creates more trouble than it solves." The young workers nodded, realizing that they had learned a valuable lesson about life as well as ranch work. They had learned that age did not equal weakness, that calm and careful action often outweighed speed, and that real strength comes from knowledge and patience as much as it does from muscles. The woman who had doubted him earlier added quietly, "I think I understand now. Strength isn't always what you see on the surface. It's deeper than that." By the late afternoon, the tasks of the day were complete. The old cowboy surveyed the land one final time, his hands resting on the worn handle of his hammer. The fields were secure, the fences strong, and the cattle calm and safe. He knew that challenges would come again, as they always did. But he also knew that the lessons of the night had been learned. The younger workers had grown in skill, confidence, and understanding. They had witnessed the power of experience, patience, and quiet strength. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the old cowboy prepared to leave the fields. The young workers gathered around to thank him for his guidance. Their voices were sincere, their admiration clear. The woman who had mocked him at the start of the evening approached and spoke softly. I see now. You've shown me what real strength is," she said. "I'm sorry for doubting you." The old cowboy nodded, smiling gently. "It's all right. What matters is that we learn and grow. Strength comes in many forms, and sometimes it is quiet, steady, and patient." He walked slowly toward the barn, each step deliberate, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles, but also the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. He had faced doubt, fatigue, and the uncertainty of night. Yet he had remained steady, calm, and effective. His actions had spoken louder than any words could have. He had proven that age had not diminished his abilities, it had refined them. Experience, patience, and careful judgment were his allies, and they had guided him through challenges that might have overwhelmed the inexperienced or impatient. That evening, as he sat on the porch of his small cabin, watching the sky darken and the stars appear once more, the old cowboy reflected on the day. He had faced mockery, doubt, and the challenge of night. Yet he had remained true to himself and his knowledge. The young workers had seen what it meant to work with wisdom, patience, and careful observation. The woman who had doubted him had learned respect and humility, and the land itself, quiet and secure, stood as proof of his skill and experience. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, both expected and unexpected. There would be more nights when darkness fell, more tasks that seemed too difficult, and more people who doubted his abilities. But he also knew that true strength was not in proving oneself to others, it was in doing what was right, in staying calm under pressure, and in guiding those around him through example. His strength had been proven that night, not through words or boasting, but through steady, careful, and effective action. As the stars twinkled above, the young workers quietly left the fields, returning to their cabins with a newfound respect for the man who had guided them through the night. They would remember the lessons of patience, observation, and quiet strength for the rest of their lives. And the old cowboy, looking out over the land he had cared for all these years, knew that his work and his example had made a difference. His age had not been a weakness. It had been a testament to endurance, wisdom, and the steady power of experience. By the time night fell again, the ranch was calm. The fences stood firm, the cattle were safe, and the younger workers had grown wiser. The woman who had doubted him now carried respect and understanding, knowing that real strength could not be judged by age alone. The old cowboy rested, not in pride, but in quiet satisfaction. The challenges had been met, the work completed, and the lesson delivered without a single boast. Through patience, skill, and calm determination, he had proven that strength is timeless, and that age, far from being a limitation, could be a source of power, guidance, and respect. And so, under the blanket of stars, the old cowboy's story became more than just a tale of a night spent working. It became a story of resilience, wisdom, and quiet courage. It was a story that showed that real strength is not measured in years, speed, or force, but in experience, calm judgment, and the steady ability to face challenges, no matter how dark the night may be.